Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom, shalom. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Trumpet's Call. I'm AmarYaH. I pray that you are holding on to faith, amunah, and holding on to hope, tekuah, during these times. Thank you for joining me once again on the channel and for another session of our Sister Chat. We will continue the series that we began a few weeks ago on decluttering our lives. In today's session, we're going to be talking about something that's called the Great Reset. I'm sure many of you have heard about it, but before we get into the details of that particular topic, we're going to be having a discussion about decluttering our finances. And with the price of things increasing the way they have been in recent weeks, months, and years, it's important that we try to be as streamlined as we can be with regard to our finances. We're going to be showing some statistics and some prices around the country and talking about what's happening around us and why these things may be happening. But before we get into the Great Reset, like I said, we're going to start with our paychecks. Let's talk about our paychecks. So if you are still working and you are earning money and you're getting a paycheck, I'm sure that when you are given the amount of money that you earn in a week or a month or in 2 weeks, you're looking at that and you're thinking, something happened to this. It's as if it's shrunk. It's as if it cannot do what it used to do in the past because everything has increased so greatly in price. So once the paycheck enters your hands, it's as if it enters this storm where it is being sucked out of your wallet faster than you can try to hold on to it for this expense and that increased electricity bill and so on and so forth. And so we're in the midst of an economic storm. And I'd like to say that this is as bad as it gets, but it's not. It's going to get worse. And so we need to talk about these things so that we can be prepared and so that we can support one another as best we can. I know that there's a lot of complaining right now about the price of things. As you go into the grocery stores, as you go into your Walmarts and your Targets and your Home Depot and your Lowe's and all of those stores that you frequent, I know the price of things is just crazy expensive. And you're asking yourself, why? What's the reason for this? Why is food so expensive? I've been asking myself the same question. There are certain items in which I have to ask myself, do I really need that? Can I live without that? Can I stretch this? And this is what we've been doing over the past year or two, really. So we're going to look at some statistics regarding the price of groceries. $10 worth of groceries in 1990. For that same amount of groceries today, you'd have to spend about $25, 2.5 times more than what you paid in 1990. And I can only imagine what the difference would be if you look at data from 1970 or 1960 or the 1800s. The prices have shot up. So why is food so expensive? We're going to take a look at some information presented on npr.org, and it says, groceries. How has the price changed since before the pandemic? Up 29% since February 2020, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Why have prices gone up? Well, the pandemic initially snarled supply chains as restaurants were shuttered and consumers suddenly had to prepare 3 meals at home each day. That was compounded in 2022 by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which raised food prices around the world. Avian flu added to more recent spike in egg prices. And now, President Trump's tariffs are pushing up the price of imported foods like bananas and coffee. And so this is just in part the reasons why the food prices continue to go up and up and up. They were going up before 2020. They were going up before Ukraine was invaded. And so we have to ask ourselves, is there something more behind these price increases? Let's talk about eggs. I know. I wanted to buy good quality eggs, but even the lower quality eggs were $5 a dozen. And it was very frustrating for a while. And I found that you could always buy local eggs for about $5 or $6 a dozen. And I thought, well, that was a lot when you can get them at the grocery store for about $2 or $1 a dozen. But after a while, the grocery store prices for the eggs were the same as the local prices for the eggs. So it was just better to buy local. But right now, the price of eggs has come down some. It peaked in March this year at about $6.23 on average per dozen. That's about 50 cents an egg. That's a lot of money for an egg. Our August price is about $3.60 on average. Okay, so that's come down, but that's still way more than they used to be. I remember buying a dozen eggs for 99 cents. That was for the large ones. You could get the medium ones for 79 cents. And when they would go on sale, they'd be even cheaper. And so eggs were always one of those things that you could buy because it was cheap food, cheap meal, cheap breakfast, cheap lunch, cheap dinner, but not anymore. And so many people are struggling, trying to make ends meet, trying to figure out how to pay the bills and how to feed themselves with limited resources because wages are not keeping up with inflation. It's not keeping up with the price of these items in these stores. So let's talk about rent. The reality of realty. Why are rent prices so high? Now, you would think that there's nothing that could justify charging people more for rent other than just greed. Because what more of an expense would someone who owns a house have? They're paying the mortgage, yes, but they're not paying the electricity bill. They're paying the taxes, yes, so I can understand that that might cause a price increase, but not to the degree that we're seeing. Truth be told, many of the rentals today are being bought up by these hedge funds or private corporations, and they don't care what they charge. Their concern is the bottom line, right? It's not about the family or how they make ends meet. It's about their profit. So what is the average price of rent in the United States? Right now, the average price of rent for a 696 square foot apartment is $1,640. Am I the only one who thinks that's kind of crazy? On average, in some places, it's less. In some places, it's more. For example, if you live in California, certain parts of California, or if you live in certain urban parts of New York State, it's likely going to be way more. If you live in Chicago, it's probably going to be more. For a 696 square foot apartment on average, that's tiny. That's very small. Okay, so as prices continue to go up, people are continuing to try to put two and two ends together to make them meet in the middle. So according to apartment.com, the national average are as follows. For a studio apartment, the average rent is about $1,700 a month for 463 square feet. One bedroom apartment, $1,640 for 696 square feet. It's really interesting that the studio is more expensive than the one bedroom. The two bedroom, on average, is about $1,900 a month for 996 square feet. And a three bedroom, on average, is $2,381 a month for about 1,284 square feet. Now, these are apartments. These are not homes. Homes would be more expensive if you were to rent those, okay? Let's talk about gas prices. The gas prices have gone up. They continue to go up. They're continuing to soar. And it is very expensive to fill up a vehicle these days, especially if you have a big one, like a truck or an SUV. In this image, you'll see the prices behind you. This is a gas station in California. You'll see that the average price of all levels of gasoline are $4 plus. Okay, in some places it's less, in some places it's more. As of today, the average price of gas is about $3.16 nationwide. That's a lot of money for a gallon of gas. Once again, not to age myself, but I remember when gas was 99 cents a gallon. I remember that. And I remember it getting down to 87 cents a gallon. Those were the good old days. Let's talk about used cars. If any of you are regular viewers of the channel, you know that recently I did a video in which my family and I were looking to purchase a used SUV, and we were shocked by the prices of used vehicles We just couldn't believe it, that they're about on average $10,000 more than they were just a few years ago. So why are they so expensive? According to ConsumerAffairs.com, used car prices have surged so far in 2025, and the study shows affordable options are disappearing from the market, and I can concur. That is absolutely true. The average price of a 3-year-old used car has increased 40%, almost 41% since the pandemic, from $23,159 in 2019 to $32,635 in 2025. Used cars priced under $20,000 make up 49% of the 3-year-old market in 2019, compared with 11% of the market today. Passenger cars saw the biggest price increase in 2019, up 48.7%, with truck prices up 28.8% and SUVs up 15.4%. Health insurance, that's going up as well. Why are health insurance costs rising? Mercer said the overall health care costs are rising because hospitals, doctors, and drug companies have raised prices. Well, that goes without saying. They raise prices because they can. Now, their expenses may be increased, granted, but they're raising prices because they can, okay? There are certain things in the world that you've got to have. You've got to have health care if you're in need of it. If you have an accident and you need to go to the doctor, or you're in need of regular medication and you need to see your doctor. You need to put gas in your car if you have a car, and you need to eat, right? There's certain things you absolutely have to have, and you also need a place to live. So these rising prices of things that are non-negotiables is really putting a burden on the citizens of the United States. And not only the United States, because we're seeing similar things happening all over the world. Skipping down to the end, it reads, for the exact same service a year ago, a visit to the doctor is about 3 to 4% higher, Patel said. The rest is related to greater utilization of services. Let's talk about our electric and gas bills. I saw recently a video in which a woman was describing her gas and electric bill. It had come in for that month, and she said, guess how much it is. And I couldn't guess, and I didn't guess. She said $850 or $60 for that month. And I blinked a couple of times because that's crazy expensive. Her house was about 2,500 square feet, $800 plus a month. Why are electricity bills so expensive? Well, many municipalities are making deals with companies that are moving into rural areas, setting up data centers, and data centers use a lot of electricity. And so in order to lower the business of the data center, rural municipalities are agreeing to cover the cost of the electrical bill for that particular data center, and they're passing those costs onto the citizens. Now, the citizens aren't benefiting at all. The municipalities are collecting tax revenue from these data companies, these data centers, but the people are paying the increased cost of electricity, and they're not really getting anything in return. So that's why that's one of the reasons we're seeing increased electricity bills in places where these data centers are going up all over this country and all over the world. And what do you think these data centers are providing data for? Yes, AI. It's increasing. But let's get back to the price of electricity. Long-term grid electricity price forecast. So as you can see, this grid is in an upward trajectory. The prices continue to go up and up and up. Since 1980, there have been a few shifts in the prices, but for the most part, the prices have been going up. The pink colors are the recorded data up to 2024, and then from 2025, they have projected or a forecast of where the prices are going. And as you can see, the forecast is for the electricity to continue to increase year over year over year. On this chart, you'll see the United States, and you'll see a map of price increases of electricity in residential areas based on your state. So the darker the color, the greater the price increase. So for example, you see in the lighter colored areas of Montana and Nevada, for example, you'll actually see a price decrease of about 10%. But in other areas like Maine is the only really dark colored state here, and it is an increase of about 30%. Other states like South Carolina and Florida, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, you'll see about 20% increases, and the rest, for the most part, are about 10% increases. The expense of your electricity bill is contingent upon where you live. Okay, let's continue. Why is everything a subscription now? Have you all noticed that, brothers and sisters? Everything is a subscription. I remember going into Office Depot and purchasing software, or purchasing software online. And then you purchase the software, you download the software onto your laptop or your PC, and then you own it. And you use that software until you decide you want to upgrade by buying more software. That's not the way it is these days. Everything is a subscription. You need Word, Microsoft Word, it's a subscription. You need Outlook, it's a subscription. You need Excel, Microsoft Office, it's a subscription. You need QuickBooks or Quicken, it's a subscription. Everything has now become a subscription. And why is that? Of course, revenue. Subscriptions make more money for businesses. These days, it feels like we're juggling dozens of subscriptions for smartphone apps, PC software, news websites, TV streaming services, appliance features, audiobooks, podcasts, delivery services, car features, gadgets, and more. Whew, exhausting. A 2021 poll conducted by West Monroe found that Americans on average were spending around $273 per month on subscription services. If you add rent to that list, subscription housing, it feels like we might not own anything ourselves ever again. Could this be part of the agenda? That you'll own nothing and you'll be happy? The trend is toward rental, not ownership. Even today, brothers and sisters, being able to practice and exercise the American dream and purchase a home, it's out of reach for a lot of people. And our millennials and Gen Z populations, they're not able to thrive. They're not able to aspire to the heights that their parents were because home ownership is out of reach for many. It's just out of reach. And so people rent. Americans are swiping more. Consumer debt is up 9.7% annually in July. Americans have been using their credit cards more than ever this summer. Revolving credit went up by 9.7% in July of 2025, compared with an earlier year, according to the Federal Reserve. After months of moderating borrowing for most of 2025, the sudden spike shows that many people are increasingly depending on debt to help cover everyday costs. Indeed, indeed. Here is a chart of total household debt by type. You'll see mortgages, home equity, revolving lines of credit, auto loans, credit cards, student loans, and other. The greatest expense in most households is a mortgage or rent. And then you have student loans. They take up a really big chunk of the monthly income. And then you have auto loans and then credit cards and so on and so forth. And so you see the trend is on an upward trajectory. Particularly since 2020, you can see that it's really taking an upward trajectory where people are using their credit cards more. Well, it's really interesting because as prices continue to increase, it makes sense that people are putting more things on credit cards, in order to make their ends meet. So here is where we get into the meat of the matter, so to speak. So in today's Sista Chat, we're going to be talking about cluttered finances. So I have just described to you a situation in which many of us find ourselves where the finances just aren't financing. The bills are building, and it's difficult to pull everything together and save money and hope for a home and hope to be able to save money for future expenses, emergencies, things of that nature. The price of everything continues to go up, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. We're going to be talking about cluttered finances. We're going to be talking about the Great Reset. This is a quote by Donald Trump, and he said, "Sadly, the American dream is dead." He said that, all the while promising to come into office and make all of these sweeping changes and make everything better, take the prices of things down, restore free speech, all of these things that were promised. But he says, the American dream is dead. And indeed it is dead. Here is a cartoon image of people on a bridge leading to the American dream. And you can see that the bridge is in disrepair and it's crumbling, much like America's infrastructure these days. This is what it looks like. And so it's treacherous indeed as you try to traverse the walkway, the alleyway, the path to making it in this world. This is what you find. And some people are just giving up. Many are homeless. Many don't know where their next meal is coming from. And it's sad. And you have the president, current president of the United States, saying that the American dream is dead. In addition to that, we find the death of the middle class. And this article is dated June 11th, 2020, and it reads, "Once again, America is on the fast track to becoming a feudal society. A society in which there are two classes, not three. One of the things that differentiated America from the other countries in the world is having a thriving middle class. The landlord and the tenant, the two classes. And this is where America's headed. You can see it. The landlord and the tenant. And more often than not, the landlord is a corporation, not an individual. The shareholder and the worker. The same wretched society in which our founding fathers fought to escape 250 years ago. The sad thing is that it's happening right in front of our own eyes, as the stock market is nearly up 40% since mid-March, while the economy has spiraled down to levels not seen since the Great Depression. Now, this was written in 2020. It's even worse now in 2025. There are over 40 million Americans unemployed, and last week, the stock market printed a new all-time high. How could those numbers be real? As I'm recording this video, the stock market is at about 46,000 points. How could those numbers be accurate? How can we have such a thriving stock market in the midst of such economic uncertainty? It seems overly inflated, like a balloon. And when it pops, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be hurting. Continuing. A society of have and have-nots. We all feel this happening, but most of us don't understand how or why. America's wealth and income inequality gap have substantially widened since the Great Recession in 2009. More people are unable to afford their deemed necessities for living, and thus the working and middle class share of the debt has since exploded, while the middle class share of income has been reduced by a third. The middle class has been trading more debt for less income for the past decade and continues to do so at an alarming rate. So if the middle class has lost a third of its income, where has that income gone? Has it gone to those who are working class, or has it gone upward to those who are in the 1% or the 2% or the 5% of the wealthiest people in the country? The wealth has gone up. Trickle-down economics is a joke. It doesn't work. People who receive the income hold on to the income, and they don't allow it to trickle down. Continuing. If only our expectations adjusted at the same rate our income declined, we might not have ended up where we are today, trading status for freedom. So if you'd like to read more, you can read more at abandonedcomfort.com. Here is a map on the screen of the cost of living index by country. This is a statistic from the mid-year 2025. Now, what I'm describing to you is not just happening in America. It's happening all over the world, like I said earlier. If you look at the data presented here, the colors that are closer to green are countries where the cost of living index is moderate, livable, okay? The countries that are white, no data has been presented or provided. The colors that are red or orange, the cost of living index is increasing or higher. You'll see the entire United States in an orange situation heading to red. You see Canada less desperate. It's orange, but not as dark orange as the United States. You see a fair amount of green in South America and Central America. You see a fair amount of green in Asia. You see a fair amount of green on the continent of Africa. You see a lot of red and orange in Europe. So this seems to be a Western thing. Australia also, a part of the West, is orange, dark orange. So you see that those parts of the world that consider themselves developed, or the West, the Western Bloc, the more civilized or developed nations, they're struggling the most with the cost of living, as opposed to those less developed parts of the world. Here's another index. Here's a cost of living index by country, 2025 mid-year. And you'll see that the countries here listed on this chart, the ones that seem to have the most or the highest cost of living seem to be the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy, and Canada. Okay? As I said, some of the more quote-unquote developed nations of the world. China and Russia, not as high, not as bad. Okay? Let's continue. We're now going to read this article entitled, "What is the Great Reset?" And this article was written by Michael Rechtenwald, who is the Chief Academic Officer and American Scholars at Hillsdale College. And the name of their online journal is Imprimis. And the article begins, "Indeed, just last year, Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, a famous organization made up of the world's political, economic, and cultural elites that meet annually in Davos, Switzerland, and Thierry Malleret, co-founder and main author of the Monthly Barometer, published a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. In the book, they define the Great Reset as a means of addressing the weaknesses of capitalism that were purportedly exposed by the COVID pandemic. From here on out, I will be referring to the Great Reset as the GR. The GR aims to usher in a bewildering economic amalgam. Schwab's stakeholder capitalism, which I have called corporate socialism, and Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben has called communist capitalism. In brief, stakeholder capitalism involves the behavioral modification of corporations to benefit not shareholders, but stakeholders, individuals and groups that stand to benefit or lose from corporate behavior. Stakeholder capitalism requires not only corporate responses to pandemics and ecological issues such as climate change, but also rethinking, commitments to already vulnerable communities within their ecosystems. This is the social justice aspect of the Great Reset. To comply with that, governments, banks, and asset managers use environmental, social, and governance ESG index to squeeze non-woke corporations and businesses out of the market. The ESG index is essentially a social credit score that is used to drive ownership and control of production away from the non-woke or the non-compliant. So, summarizing here, there is this agenda to modify and change capitalism in a way that greater benefits the stakeholders. And so, with that said, they are desiring to shift how they operate in the world by focusing on governance, environmental changes, and social changes, maybe social justice changes, so that they can better market their product to the people that they desire to market them to. They can increase their profits and they can make life better for those down the chain. Okay? Think about trickle-down economics, what I described earlier. The whole concept of trickle-down economics is that when you make the rich richer, then those monies trickle down to the middle class and to the poor. That has not proven itself to be true. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The middle class is squeezed either into poverty or they somehow rise to become one of the rich. And so we are indeed seeing a two-tiered system develop in which there are the rich and there are the poor, and there's nothing in the middle. This is an agenda to determine how to manage the people who are in the lower tiers, the lower rungs of society. How do you manage the poor? In addition to managing the poor, it is stated here in this article that those who are considered non-woke or non-compliant would be squeezed out of the system. So let's say, for instance, you're a business owner and you have managed to grow your business and your business is thriving. And though you wouldn't call yourself wealthy, you wouldn't call yourself one of the elites, you have a thriving business and you're able to employ people and things are looking good for your company. But there are certain environmental policies or certain cultural policies that you are not in alignment with. You just aren't. They're inconsistent with your faith, with your belief, and with your morality, your sense of morality. And so you disagree and you don't pass or you don't encourage those things that those who are the moneyed tier over you, the elites, as they're passing this legislation or indicating that businesses should do X, Y, and Z, you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't believe in that. I don't want to do that. I don't want my business being represented in that way. What's being said here is that there would be a concerted effort to squeeze you out of the market. So the elite above you would go after you to squeeze you out of the market because you would be then considered non-compliant or non-woke. Okay, so that those who would have the resources and the power at the top of the pyramid would be those who were quote unquote compliant, woke, and who would further the cause of the agenda as stated. Okay, and trust and believe the agenda as stated is anti-Yahuwah. It's anti-Mashiach. It's anti-truth. It's anti-kingdom of Yahuwah. And so this is the system that the scriptures have been telling us about, and we have seen hints of it. We've seen shadows of it. We've seen indications of it. Well, this is it spelled out. So let's continue, and we'll read more about what the plan is to bring the world under subjection. In their recent book on the Great Reset, Schwab and Mallory pit stakeholder capitalism against neoliberalism, defining the latter as a corpus or a body of ideas and policies favoring competition over solidarity, creative destruction over government intervention, and economic growth over social welfare. In other words, neoliberalism refers to the free enterprise system, the system that we currently have. In opposing that system, stakeholder capitalism entails corporate cooperation with the state and vastly increased governmental intervention in the economy. Yes, family, this is what you're hearing. You're hearing corporation merging itself with government to make decisions for the corporation that benefit the corporation and ostensibly the people, but not really. Okay? It's a merging of government with business. Let's continue. Proponents of the Great Reset hold neoliberalism responsible for our economic woes. Now remember, they're calling neoliberalism here the current free market economy. They're calling that neoliberalism, okay? But in truth, the governmental favoring of industries and players within industries, what used to be known as corporatism or economic fascism, has been the real source of what Schwab and his allies at WEF decry. And I agree with that. I agree that it's not the market set up as it is that's the problem. A free market economy where if you have the will and the hard work and the capital to enter into it and sell a product, and the product is good and people like it and they can buy it, you can become wealthy. There's nothing wrong with that. Where the problem lies is this current culture where the rich are being favored over everyone else. Once again, think about trickle-down economics. In trickle-down economics, the rich and corporations have their taxes cut so that they can spend less, put more into the system, have more to invest in business so that they can then trickle that wealth down to those who are in the middle, those who are at the bottom. And as I said before, it didn't happen. It wasn't designed to happen. The policy was designed to favor the rich, and that is the problem. The free market economy is not necessarily the problem. The problem is favoring the rich, or what's called corporatism. That's the problem. Which isn't to say that the free market economy is ideal or that it's kingdom-minded, because it's not. But for what it is, it will work if people get out of the way and allow it to work without interruption or interference. Continuing. While approved corporations are not necessarily monopolies, the tendency of GR is toward monopolization, vesting as much control over production and distribution in as few favored corporations as possible, while eliminating industries and producers deemed non-essential. Where did we hear that word recently? Non-essential? Do you remember during the pandemic, there were essential and non-essential businesses? And the ones deemed non-essential tend to be the mom and pop operations, the ones where they were owned by individuals. And the one deemed essential were the ones that were corporate giants like Walmart and Target and Home Depot. They got to be opened, but the ones that were deemed non-essential had to shut down. And many of those businesses went out of business during that time. Let's continue. While eliminating industries and producers deemed non-essential or inimical. To bring this reset about, Schwab writes, every country from the United States to China must participate. And every industry from oil to gas to tech must be transformed. So they're calling for a wholesale shift and change of the way things currently are in not just the United States, but in the whole world, and everyone must participate. That sounds like a new world. I'll let you fill in the blank, doesn't it? Let's continue. Another way of describing the goal of the GR is capitalism with Chinese characters. A two-tiered economy with profitable monopolies and the state on top and socialism for the majority below. Let that sink in. Capitalism with Chinese characters. It's essentially the Chinese model. Let's continue. Several decades ago, as China's growing reliance on the for-profit sectors of its economy could no longer be credibly denied by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, its leadership approved the slogan, socialism with Chinese characters, to describe its economic system. Formulated by Deng Xiaoping, the phrase was meant to rationalize the CCP's allowance of for-profit development under a socialist political system. The CCP considered the privatization of the Chinese economy to be a temporary phase, lasting as long as 100 years if necessary, on the way to a communist society. Party leaders maintained that this approach has been necessary in China because socialism was introduced too early there. When China was a backward agrarian country, China needed a capitalist booster shot. So, to summarize, what they're saying that in China, they determined that their socialist, their communist system wasn't working. And so they needed a boost of capitalism to help to bring it to a greater sense of health. If capitalism was needed to be a shot in the arm to the CCP system to give it some health and vitality, then giving a system that is capitalist in nature a shot of socialism will make it weaker and sicker. And that's what they're proposing. But we know that won't work. But that's what they're proposing. Let's continue. The GR represents the development of the Chinese system in the West, but in reverse. Whereas the Chinese political class began with a socialist political system and then introduced privately held for-profit production, the West began with capitalism and is now implementing a Chinese-style political system. This Chinese-style system includes vastly increased state intervention in the economy, on the one hand, and on the other, the kind of authoritarian measures that the Chinese government used to control its population. Brothers and sisters, have you begun to see a little bit of heavy-handedness in the world, particularly in the United States, more authoritarianism? It's all part of the new system. Let's continue. Schwab and Malaret write that if the past 5 centuries in Europe and America have taught us anything, it is that acute crises contribute to boosting the power of the state. It has always been the case, and there's no reason it should be different with the pandemic. Okay, so they're admitting that states, governments use crises, sometimes created crises, to bring about sweeping change to economies, to governments, to society, okay? And during this C-19 pandemic, one of the things that happened is not only being forced to take in medicines into your body that you didn't desire, not only that, but also this new system that came out of that most people don't realize that has been adopted. Because remember, everyone had to participate, right? Everyone had to participate. And so to tell whether or not we have entered into this system beyond our knowledge and beyond our will, you have to take a look at what they're presenting to see if you see these things being implemented in society. And so we understand that part of the agenda of the C-19 was to implement this new system. So whether or not we see it active in our society or not, you'll have to look for the clues and the cues as we continue reading this article. Let's continue. The draconian lockdown measures employed by Western governments managed to accomplish goals of which corporate socialists in the West could only dream. Above all, the destruction of small businesses, eliminating competitors for corporate monopolists favored by the state. In the U.S. alone, according to the Foundation for Economic Education, millions of small businesses closed their doors due to the lockdown. Millions. You want to know what happened to the middle class? That's what happened to the middle class. They had to close the doors of their businesses that they had started. That's what happened to the middle class. Yelp data indicated that 60% of those closures are now permanent. Meanwhile, companies like Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google enjoyed record gains. Why? Because they're being deemed essential, and the small businesses and the small business owners, they're being deemed non-essential. They're non-essential to this new system, this new GR, this new reset. They're non-essential. What's essential are corporations. This is a corporatocracy, okay? So before we continue, I want us to take a look at the draconian lockdown measures that were employed all over the world. Now, one of the things we just read is that a part of this system, it involves authoritarianism, heavy-handedness, and giving people little opportunity to exercise their rights granted by the Most High, Yahuwah. Okay? So do we see that? Did we see that happening at that time? Forced mask wearing, social distancing, lockdowns, people being furloughed, people being forced to work from home, restaurants being closed, businesses being closed, only essential businesses being open and only for certain amounts of time. So, did a new system come into place during this pandemic that people are not aware of, that you're in a new system? And that's why things are so different. That's why the food prices are so high. It's all a part of the agenda. Let's continue. Other developments that advance the Great Reset agenda have included unfettered immigration. Unfettered means no holds barred, just allowing anyone into the country that you want. Did we see that during the pandemic? Did we see the borders open and people flooding in? Yes, we did. Did we see unfettered borders in Europe as the Syrian crisis occurred and millions of people went into Europe? The developed nations are experiencing unfettered immigration. Canada, same thing. Many, many people coming into the country and placing a burden on the economies there. It's all a part of the agenda. Let's continue. Unfettered immigration, travel restrictions for otherwise legal border crossings, and the Federal Reserve's unrestrained printing of money and the subsequent inflation, increased taxation, increased dependence on the state, broken supply chain, the restrictions and job losses due to vax mandates, and the prospect of personal carbon allowances. All of these things we're seeing. This is what we are experiencing now. So we're seeing the signs that what's being proposed is in actuality our reality. Continuing. Such policies reflect the fairness aspect of the GR. Fairness requires lowering the economic status of people in wealthier nations like the U.S. relative to that of people in poor regions of the world. One of the functions of the woke ideology is to make the majority of developed countries feel guilty about their wealth, which the elites aim to reset downwards. Except one notices for the elites themselves, who need to be rich in order to fly in their private jets to Davos, Switzerland each year. So, another one of the agendas that we see here is to make those who are below the line. You've got the elite on top. You've got those ones who are able to participate in a new form of corporatism or a new form of capitalism. And then you've got the poor plebeians on the bottom. You've got the poor workers on the bottom, those who are of the working class. The middle class has been extinguished. Those in the middle class have either risen to wealth or they have dropped to the working class, and there's nothing in the middle. And so those on top, the elite, they control everything else, and they control every aspect of your life. When you go to bed, when you wake up, what you eat, what you drink, what you think, what you wear, where you live, how you live. Every aspect of your life. This is what's being proposed. And in order to do that, though, there's one crucial thing that has to happen. The wealth of the wealthier nations has to be erased for those people at a certain level. They either have to rise to the elite or they have to fall to the working class. And so placing small business owners in the category of non-essential, forcing them to shut their doors and eventually shut their businesses, relegated them to the working class. Increased cost of living is really occurring in developed nations because that's where the focus is, to strip the wealth from the people and send it upward and to drop everyone middle class down to the status of the working poor. And then they're controllable because the working poor are in need of resources. They're in need of help. They're in need of someone telling them what to do and how to live. And that's what this agenda seeks to do. So let's continue. The GR's corporate stakeholder model overlaps with its governance and geopolitical model. States and favored corporations are combined in public-private partnerships and together have control of governance. This corporate-state hybrid is largely unaccountable to the constituents of national governments. Did you hear that? This hybrid system in which businesses and government are merged, there is no accountability to constituents of national government. And constituents would be us, the people. Think back to yourself when a certain business owner was in the government under Doge. What was that but a merging of corporation and government? That's what it was. You had someone who is a business owner with no government experience being assigned, not elected, to his position, a position of great power in which he had sensitive data about all of the citizens of the United States. And yet he was not elected to that position. He was a business owner. And he made decisions about who should keep their jobs and who should lose their jobs. And you had many, many people in government lose their jobs as a result of the report that he put forward. He's a business owner, but he's making decisions about what happens to those in government. This is a merging. This is a hybridization of government with corporation. It's a corporatocracy, and it's here. Did you know it? Did you know that it was here? It is. Let's continue. Governance is not only increasingly privatized, but also, and more importantly, corporations are deputized as major additions to governments and intergovernmental bodies, as I just mentioned before with Doge. The state is thereby extended, enhanced, and augmented by the addition of enormous corporate assets. As such, corporations have become what I called governmentalities, otherwise private organizations wielded as state apparatuses with no obligation to answer to pesky voters. Since these corporations are multinational, the state essentially becomes globalist. It becomes a part of a global society. If you're being managed by a corporation that has a global presence, you're now a global citizen. Since these corporations are multinational, the state essentially becomes globalist, whether or not a one world government is ever formalized. So whether or not anyone comes out and says, okay, now there's a one world government, it's happening under our noses, and we're a part of it, whether we want to be or not. We're in it. We're in it. But we must be aware of it so that we can make decisions for ourselves that keep us away from sinning against the Most High Yahuwah. You've got to know where you are, and you've got to know what's coming so that you can work to protect yourself as much as you can, as much as you can. Reliance on the Most High and on one another is going to be crucial during this time. Continuing. As if the economic and governmental resets were not dramatic enough, the technological reset reads like a dystopian science fiction novel. It is based on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or the 4IR for short. The first, second, and third industrial revolutions were mechanical, electrical, and digital revolutions. The fourth IR marks the convergence of existing and merging fields, including big data, AI, machine learning, quantum computing, genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics. The foreseen results will be the merging of the physical, digital, and biological worlds, which present a challenge to the ontologies by which we understand ourselves and the world, including the definition of a human being. Part of this system, and it's been alluded to, is the merging of man with machine, man with digital, man with nanotechnology, man with robotics, and our genetics becoming something other. Man becoming a new creation, created in the image of man, created in the image of another, not in the image of the Most High Yahuwah. The temple of the Most High Yahuwah becomes corrupted, and the Most High will say, let us remove hence from this place. This is no longer what I created. That is what the shots were about in part, to create the framework so that these connections can be made in a greater way, so that the building blocks for turning man into machine could be injected. Many of us are unaware of what's happening around us, but we must be aware. We must be watchful and prayerful, because the things that have been foretold in the scriptures, they're here. They're not coming. They're here. Continuing. In short, the 4IR technologies subject human beings to a kind of technological management that makes surveillance by the NSA look like child's play. Schwab goes so far as to cheer developments that aim to connect human brains directly to the cloud for the sake of data mining. Our thoughts and our memories. If successful, this would constitute a technological mastery over decision-making that would threaten human autonomy and undermine free will. At this point, man would have been co-opted and taken over, and no longer fully human. The 4IR seeks to accelerate the merging of humans and machines, resulting in a world in which all information, including genetic information, is shared, and every action, thought, and motivation is known, predicted, and possibly precluded. And by the phrase possibly precluded, it means you think a thought, they are able to determine what you're thinking, and they're able to, like the thought police, interfere before you act, or accuse you of acting in a particular way that you have no intention of acting, and then taking measures against you before you act. Think about the movie Minority Report. Continuing. Unless taken out of the hands of corporate socialist technocrats, the 4th IR will eventually lead to a virtual and inescapable prison of body and mind, the Matrix realized. They put it right out there for us to see. The Matrix realized, where human beings are essentially batteries and where our reality is scripted. This is what the GR entails. This is why your food prices are so high. This is why your expenses are so high. There's an agenda afoot to make every single middle-class person either rise to the elite, and then you have to adopt their agenda, or fall into poverty, so that the poor can be easily controlled. Poor people, hungry people, are controllable people. Continuing. Just as Schwab and the WEF predicted, the COVID crisis has accelerated the GR. Monopolistic corporations have consolidated their grip on the economy from above, while socialism continues to advance for the rest of us below. In partnership with big digital, big pharma, the mainstream media, national and international health agencies, and compliant populations, hitherto democratic Western states, think especially of Australia, New Zealand, and Austria, are being transformed into totalitarian regimes modeled after China. We have heard on quite a few occasions while reading this article about the term monopolies and the monopolization of business. And we're seeing it happen all around us, brothers and sisters. Think about the businesses that you once knew and perhaps loved. Think about the products that you once knew and once loved. And then something happens where you purchase the product and it's different, it's changed. And you find out that that company has sold out to a larger company, and the product is no longer the quality product that it once was. More and more and more, secretly behind the scenes, corporations are buying up or gobbling up smaller companies. There's a monopoly that's occurring all around us, where the majority of the businesses and the majority of the products that we use are being owned by large corporations, and that allows them to leverage control over the populace, as we have a hybridization of government and business. And if you're going to do that successfully, you've got to be able to control all of the businesses, right? And that is why the middleman Middle-class business owners don't fit into this model. They just don't. And so that's why you find so many companies being sold, so many companies being offered millions and billions of dollars to sell their companies. And then they regret it. But they do so. They do so. And the corporate giants, they get fatter and fatter, and their portfolios get bigger and bigger. And we, the citizens, suffer because we have less and less options of things to purchase, things to buy, and the quality control suffers. In addition to the monopoly that's occurring all around us, developed nations, their economies are being taxed. They're having people from without the region come in, and it's creating such unrest among the people. When someone steps forward and says, I have a new system, I have an idea, let's do this. Let's create 15-minute cities and put everybody in it. The people, frustrated and desiring something different, will likely say, here, here. Yes, let's do that. Continuing. But let me end on a note of hope. Because the goals of the GR depend on the obliteration not only of free markets, but of individual liberty and free will, it is perhaps ironically unsustainable. Like earlier attempts at totalitarianism, the GR is doomed to ultimate failure. That doesn't mean, however, that it won't, again, like those earlier attempts, leave a lot of destruction in its wake, which is all the more reason to oppose it now with all our might. Hallelujah. All praises to the Most High. So bottom line, brothers and sisters, the GR is a system in which there is total governance of the human being, their mind, body, and their soul. The desire is to have them live in areas where they rent, they don't own, they own nothing. Because everything that they're granted, everything that they're given is temporary, and they themselves are temporary. And the minute they stop obeying and doing what they're told, their switch can be switched off, if you know what I mean. They're now merged with tech, and at any time, their thoughts can be erased, their mind can be read. They're no longer what the Father has created. This is what their desire is for humanity. But first, the desire is to make those in developed nations poor. Because as I said, poor people, hungry people are controllable people. That's why your grocery prices are so high. That's why eggs cost $5, $6 a dozen. That's why you can't afford beef. There's a reason for it. If we've learned anything from wickedness, they're patient. They're patient in ways that we as the righteous are not. They're patient, and they have been trying to bring us to this point in history for a long time. And here we are. Here we are. The next step, I believe, in their agenda is a digital currency. And that digital currency will tie people into the system to such a degree that you will not be able to buy or sell unless you agree to do the things that are required of you. Just as many people could not work, go to work, or buy, or sell, or leave their houses during COVID, when the heavy hand of this system brings its fist down, you will not be able to participate in the marketplace unless you abide by what their rules are. And it could very well be to once again get jabbed up. And for those who haven't, for them to do so. So brothers and sisters, this is what was meant when leader of the World Economic Forum said, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy about it. Why will you be happy? Because you'll be in the matrix, and everything around you will look like sunshine and buttercups. You'll be poor, but you'll think you're rich. You'll be hungry, but you'll think you're full. You'll be doomed, but you'll think that you've been saved. It's like that man in the movie The Matrix who was happy to eat the pretend steak. He didn't want the reality of life around him where they ate gruel and they dressed badly and they looked badly and it was the reality of their experience. He wanted the woman in the red dress. and he wanted the fake steak, and he wanted to pretend. And there's some in the society who will want that, but we can't be those. We have to be happy only with truth in the inward part. Hallelujah. This is the last thing we'll read before we prepare to end for today. This is written by Baruch Levy in a letter to Karl Marx, dated June 1st, 1928. And it reads, "The Ish people, as a whole, will be its own Messiah. It will attain world domination by the dissolution of other races, by the abolition of frontiers, the annihilation of monarchy, and by the establishment of a world republic in which the Jays will everywhere exercise the privilege of citizenship. In this NWO, the children of Israel will furnish all the leaders without encountering opposition." What's being said here so far is that in this new world system, there will be a division, those on top and those on the bottom, the workers. And those who will be in charge will be those called the children of Israel here. Not the true children, but the ones calling themselves the children of Israel. It goes on to say, without opposition. This is the goal, without opposition. Furthermore, they will furnish all the leaders, meaning all the leaders of the system will be Ish. Klaus Schwab is Ish. The governments of the different peoples forming the World Republic will fall without difficulty into the hands of the Jays. It will then be possible for the Ish rulers to abolish private property and everywhere to make use of the resources of the state. Thus the promise of the Talmud be fulfilled, in which is said that when the messianic time comes, the Jays will have all the property of the whole world in their hands. It always comes back to this, brothers and sisters. The greed of Esau Edom. It always comes back to this. He doesn't want just half the pie or 3/4 of the pie. He wants the whole pie. And the goal is world domination with them on top and everybody else, especially Jacob, on the bottom, being controlled, being compromised, being defiled. As we come together, I pray next week, Yahuwah willing, we will continue this lesson, and we're going to be talking about additional ways that many are suffering economically. And we're also going to talk about what can we do about it? How should we be living? How should we be organizing ourselves right now as we see these things happening around us? And I will say, brothers and sisters, to preempt what will be discussed next week, this is no time to be lone wolves. We need one another. When the system shuts down for those who fail to participate in it, we're going to need to share resources and perhaps even homes. You need to get yourself into a community if you don't have one already. If you're living by yourself, waiting for the cruise ship to show up, you're going to be in dire straits. Abba has said it time and time again. We're going to go through some things before we get out of here. We're going to see some things before we get out of here. Community is a must. It's a necessity. We've got to depend on the Most High, and we've got to live in community with one another, sharing resources, praying together, fasting together, seeking the Most High together, praying for mercy and for deliverance together. We've got to create little Goshens all over the world. Pray and ask Abba where He wants you to be. But lone wolf, you can't be that. You can't. Lone wolves are picked off too easily. We're going to end for today, and prayerfully we'll be able to pick this up on next week and continue talking about the things that we can do to better support ourselves with the rising costs of everything in the world today. We need Abba. We need the Most High Yahuwah. We won't survive without Him. We also need one another. Be in prayer about where Abba would have you to be. Thank you for joining me, brothers and sisters, for this session of our Sister Chat. We have been talking about decluttering our finances, the Great Reset. It's upon us, and we must walk circumspectly, wisely, redeeming the time, and we must lean on the everlasting arm of the Most High Yahuwah, and we must operate in wisdom, being as harmless as doves, but as wise and shrewd as serpents. AmarYaH. May the Most High Yahuwah Baruch and keep you, brothers and sisters, bless and keep you. And may he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and grant you shalom, peace in every area of life. And may we continue to march forward to Zion. May we continue to keep our eyes lifted up, for our redemption draws nigh. May we be found worthy to be in the grace and the Han and the shalom of the Most High Yahuwah. Until next time, brothers and sisters, shalom, shalom.